Welcome, everyone, to the C-Suite Sales and Marketing Perspectives podcast. I'm Steve McDonald, your host. Today, we've got a super interesting guest in conversation. We have on here Andy Weiss. Andy, you are the CMO of Ceipal, and it's a B2B SaaS company. And you have a interesting background. You've been on the agency side. You've been on, the client side. When we talk about it from the agencies, I've had that same background. You developed apps before their apps were even a thing. You've sold hot dogs on Facebook. But I think when just talking to you, no matter what, whether it's B2C or B2B, and this is a B2B podcast, but it's all about human-to-human marketing, right? And I know that I want you to explain a bit more about that before we get into what I think is a really interesting approach in the way that you look at the market. And it's all about building these adaptive frameworks for change. Because one thing that we all know is that nothing stays static. The environment, the audience, our ICP, everything, trends, COVID, you name it. We're constantly working in an environment of change. So there's some frameworks that really help us, I think, in that front that you're going to talk about. But before we do that, maybe just spend a minute or two and tell us a little bit more about A&D so we can get to know you.
Yeah, so thanks, Steve. So yes, I am currently the CMO of Ceipal and been there coming up on a year. Prior to that, kind of my background, my working career kind of spans two different big chapters. First was the agency side of the marketing equation, and the second half has been client side in the for-profit education and a lot of B2B SaaS. But I didn't set out to get into marketing. I actually thought I wanted to get into film, and I spent a very interesting and highly educational summer interning in LA in the old animation building on the Disney backlot, and learned a ton about storytelling and that anyone can write the first 10 minutes of a movie, but coming up with the next 80 plus minutes is really hard, and learned a lot about the movie business from that. But came away from that realizing that it wasn't really talent that got you ahead in the business at that time. And so I went looking for something else. And what was the next closest thing to the film business? And that's how I discovered advertising. But I ended up on the business side, or what we back in the day would call the suit. I was the bag carrier. And I learned a lot about storytelling from an advertising standpoint at some creative boutiques, and worked with a lot of different brands through my agency experience, and kind of came up through the .com boom and learned a lot kind of on the digital side. And I think that foundation has informed a lot about how I think about marketing today, particularly on the in-house client side, and even more so on the B2B. And I think a lot of those same themes we'll touch on in kind of the rest of our conversation today, just in terms of frameworks and things. But I think it's just kind of a different way that I walked into the business. And so maybe that shaded or influenced how I think about marketing.
Well, great. I mean, what I'd love to do is jump in and start talking about frameworks, but put it into a little bit of context, right? Because we all know about our playbooks, right? And we all have our playbooks. However, playbooks have become kind of a dirty word in the world of marketing, right? It was like, oh, you got your playbook. That kind of means you know how you're going to do it, right? You're just this is what I do. I do step one, I do step two. But that means, is there rigidity in that, right? Like, is it we've got to adapt our playbooks, right? We can't just roll out the same playbook. As soon as we think everything we've done in the past is how we do it in the future, is our first step towards failure. So that's where I think your frameworks come in. And I'll let you take it from there.
Well, okay. So I was in that same camp, I had recently finished an MBA program. So I did, and I was like, I still want to stay in marketing. So I approached my MBA program not as a career shifter, but I was like, okay, I've got this wealth of knowledge. Like, I know everything. And that was at one of the times where I made the shift from the agencies to the in-house marketing side. And this was 2007, 2008. And if you know anything about the time, the housing market was starting to crash and there was a lot of volatility. But you know what? I made the move to go to an in-house to a VC-backed organization. And they were very successful. They were growing, but I was going to be the marketing department of one. And I walked in that door with my marketing. Part of the interview process was develop, the first 90 days of the marketing plan. And so I had that in hand and I put in all the knowledge that I had. And it was like, Steve, this was gold. This was, this was ready to go. And before that door even closed behind me, the market shifted. What had been our primary customer, which was the procurement manager at an organization, suddenly that level of individual at our target customer could no longer sign off on any purchase over $10,000. And here we were with a software product, not really a SaaS product, but a software product that would save customers money. And so we were delivering real savings to them for the things that they needed to do, but they could no longer sign off on something that would save them money. Those decisions automatically went up to the C-suite, to the CFO. And how you sell to or how you communicate your features and benefits in your product to a procurement manager versus a CFO, it's very different. And so that playbook gone. And suddenly I was like, okay, what do I do? Where do I go? And so there was a lot of scrambling. Unfortunately, the burn rate of the organization was such that, the runway was not there for me to really iterate and figure out kind of how to make it work. But coming off of that, in my failure resume, I walked away like, okay, the playbook idea didn't work, but one of the things that I had extracted from it, and it's not necessarily a new idea, but it's, Warren Buffett and others kind of have these frameworks that they like to use. And so I'm like, okay, how do I apply that in marketing? And so that's how I started to approach every opportunity after that. The frameworks were Lego blocks that I could stack and build and kind of dissect and figure out the situation at an organization, or, the market changed. What are the fundamentals? Because those ultimately don't change.
Right.
But then we could unpack that, use the Lego blocks of a framework, piece it together and say, okay, here's the pathway forward. Now let's use playbooks to scale and accelerate and execute what we've already figured out with a framework. So I don't say, it's bad. Just the rote part of that where they're the golden thing that you can't stray from. No, they just have their purpose. But I think as marketers would just come to rely on them too heavily. And that's why they've got a bad connotation now.
Yeah, it's interesting, it's something that we held so dear that everybody was like so proud. Like you came in with your like liquid gold, right?
Yeah.
Like this is gonna work. Why not? So if you could break down for us the differences between a playbook and a framework, right? Frameworks, you said fundamentals, right? That don't shift, that you can rely on. Can you tell us, like from that last example, or just how do you kind of explain this definition and this difference a little bit?
So, I mean, there's the classic marketing frameworks, Porter's Five Forces, and all of those things. This is a slightly different approach, because when was the last time you used Porter's Five Forces, or when was the last time, the classic kind of textbook frameworks?
Yeah.
This is not that. This is kind of more of a loose definition of what a framework is. But it's more, for me, it's much more about like, what are the underlying principles? About being bottom line driven, or knowing your customer, or stories sell, or like little truths or truisms might be a better word, but it's little things that, hey, here's some things that we know that will help us navigate through market downturns, through even periods of euphoria and kind of like if we were operating off of, if everyone was operating off of frameworks instead of playbooks, would the dot-com boom or the AI boom be, is this going to be as high as it could be? Or are we looking at AI or some of these other bright, shiny objects as ways to help us with the fundamentals and navigate through there? Whereas a playbook is, okay, I've got a script. And, if you run with a sports analogy, this person's supposed to go, if we're running a play, this person's supposed to go here and do this. This person's supposed to go this route and do that. And all the different players, all the different pieces are supposed to move in a certain fashion. And there's even some flexibility in those playbooks that if the situation doesn't pan out the way we want to, there's still some fluidity in there. But my argument is there's not enough because, here we sit in the fall and in the US and it's football season. So the weather conditions, the rain, if there's rain, if there's wind, if there's any number of other variables can dramatically shift the play. And if that play, if the decision if your ICP changes and it goes to the C-suite, that playbook doesn't account for that level of variability.
Right.
And so that's where that kind of framework piece where, okay, knowing the customer, being able to look at your data or understand what is the objective, what is the motivation of the CFO versus the procurement manager. Now, are there commonalities? Are there differences? Do we need to emphasize this part of our product or our software, or do we need to, shift? How much do we need to shift our messaging to be able to adapt? And how close are we to the sales team to have our pulse on some of those things? Could we have seen it earlier and reacted more quickly? Do we need to provide? It's one thing to tell a procurement manager, in my example, the savings that they've delivered, but a CFO maybe wants more of a guarantee. What kind of guarantee can we package up? And so we're using the levers of offers and promotions to play around with some of those things and not wanting to overly maybe discount something, but maybe give away a free trial or give them a taste of what we're doing. And so that's kind of where I draw a little bit of try to draw a distinction between frameworks and playbooks. So it's more the fluidity. It's more like, what are the underlying pieces? Let's not get caught up in the bright, shiny stuff or, hey, here's Facebook or here's AI or here's what ChatGPT says. It's
right. The channels to the market always going to change, right? The playbook and how you execute are going to change, but things that don't change are, I have to have a fundamental understanding of my ICP. If I don't have that, then I have no way that I can create the right experiences, that I can message properly, that I can package what we do in the right ways, that I can clearly even understand what their challenges are. So to me, a framework is something that will never change. I need to understand my ICP better than anybody else or any competitor in my industry. That's never going to change. Now, the ICP may. And I just got off a podcast with a CRO. It was like, as we go through different stages of growth, right, our ICP is going to evolve and it's going to change. And so that the playbook would have to change. The playbook can be fluid, like you said, but there are certain things you're never going to change. Like, I need to know my ICP better than anybody else.
Well, and as a marketer, yes. And as a marketer, most likely you're going to, throughout your career, work for more than one organization. And you're going to need to figure out how to port over some of those things. If you were like I was, a number of years ago, walked in with, here's my stack of playbooks. Well, those may go out the window very quickly. And I might have a short tenure at that organization because I don't have many other things in my bag of tricks. But if I come in and I can quickly figure out the fundamentals of the business. How do we really make money? Like the CRO that you were talking to, how are they making money? What are they, as a marketer, you need to understand how your organization's making money. And that's part of that bottom up approach. What are the fundamentals of that? Because from a budgeting standpoint, we could, one of the fundamentals that I like to use is the top down, bottom up budget. And we're going through that for 2025 right now. And we're starting with the bottom up because we've got goals. We have a certain level of profitability that we need to maintain or achieve. And how do we do that in a fashion that then when I look at the marketing plan from the top down, I know what level of, traffic or support I can provide to different areas to ensure that, hey, this vertical is more profitable for us than this vertical. But the acquisition cost is a little different. So my go-to-market's going to be a little different over here, but my return is better. So I could get a lot of these low cost ones, but I have to get an inordinate amount of those to offset these higher value ones. And so what's that balance? And that informs or shifts what I do from a top down standpoint. And so understanding how your organization makes money and being able to walk in and say, as a marketer, you're not, brand is important. I'm a huge fan of brand marketing. I think especially in a B2B space, it's undervalued. But if you're a brand marketer who understands how your organization makes money and can align the two pieces, you're going to have a lengthy career.
So we've talked a couple of times before this, and I'm still learning and putting the pieces together. Because like that CRO that I was just talking to, he has a framework.
Yeah.
And one of his frameworks is that I want a diversified revenue portfolio. So no matter what's happening and changes going on in the market, he's like, I don't want all my eggs in one basket. I want to have diversified revenue portfolio. And so that doesn't mean that we have different ICPs and we have different markets that we're going in after. So, but I'm not going to go and place all my eggs in one basket.
Yeah.
I've done that way too many times. So that's a framework, right?
Yes.
And what I'm putting two and two together here is that, because I was thinking, well, geez, if these are all like fundamentals, we should probably all have like the same basic frameworks, but that's not the case, right? Like that's the first CRO I've talked to that had that perspective. And I asked him about that and he said, no, I think it's kind of unique. And I was like, well, okay, but that makes a ton of sense, right?
Yeah.
So our frameworks aren't, I imagine they're things that a lot of us would share the same frameworks. Like we have to understand our ICP better than anybody else, right? That they're the highest authority in the business. So nobody's going to say no to that. But like the diversified revenue portfolio, that might be a framework that one revenue, CRO might have that another might not have. So it's your own set of frameworks that you carry into your career, right? And throughout your career that are going to be how you recommend inside of your company growth.
Yes.
We all have our own personal brands, right?
Yeah. So like yes. And I think one of the things that's important is I'm a huge advocate of people like developing a swipe file that you've got your own, someplace you've got a place where, hey, I was talking to Steve the other day and he mentioned this idea of a diversified portfolio as a framework. Okay, I'm going to jot that down and I'm going to put that in my swipe file because at some point I'm going to be in some organization where I'm, trying to figure something out. I'm going to be looking for some ideas or some inspiration. I can, there's nothing new under the sun. Right. So I'm going to go into my swipe file and, hey, I had this conversation with Steve about diversified portfolios. That actually that's a framework that might actually apply to our situation now. And so let me do a little bit more homework on that, understand it. I'm going to test that out. And I think part of the reason why we all have different frameworks is there's a lot of common ones, but I think it's our personal experience with those and our confidence in understanding how they work and how we put them in play. And I think, we could go through, like, we could rattle off a bunch of different frameworks, but we may have different names for them, or different ways of kind of applying those frameworks. But I think that the truth in what you uncovered in your conversation with that CRO is that in B2B, there's been this mythology. We tend to overcomplicate, and we overcomplicate to our detriment. We overcomplicate in that it's business. I'm selling you a business product, so I need to sell it to you in a different fashion. And so, Steve, just because you came in on, this morning, and you didn't take off your Steve hat or your consumer hat and put on your business hat, and suddenly you're thinking differently and you're operating and buying things differently. No, you're still a human. You're still Steve. You're still making emotional decisions. You're still making decisions based off of brand impressions and stuff. And that's overcomplicated because
Right.
and same thing with frameworks. There's not enough of us doing it or applying it, that those of us, the dirty little secret, or the secret for everyone, is if you start to apply some of these things, there's this inflection point. The framework, brand marketing, data-driven, fundamentally grounded marketers are going to, navigate their way through whatever's going on with AI. Because at the end of the day, whether you're working with a CRO, whether you're in an organization that is trying to understand the value of marketing, there's all kinds of headlines these days about, okay, this organization is cutting marketing. This one is elevating it or broadening the reach of marketing. Well, there's, marketing in theory should be in a lot of different, in every conversation. And it's these frameworks that help you kind of get into those conversations and get that seat at the table. But those frameworks are also the things that are going to help you keep that, because you're unpacking, you understand kind of at a fundamental level how marketing can help the organization grow, how it can help speak to customers from a customer success standpoint, how it can help recruit talent from an HR standpoint, how it can help your new CRO that came in and is trying to diversify the offerings so that there's less volatility in the organization. And marketing and sales through the CRO are helping to drive some stability and save people's jobs and do all of and grow the organization
Yeah.
and be heroes to the rest, because you've got this grounding.
So I like what you introduced there, is that frameworks aren't, we're two CMOs, right? CMOs or frameworks aren't just for CMOs. You talk about budget, you talk about all the go-to-market strategies, your customer outreach, HR, right? So is a framework something that as you're, like you said, like a seat at the table with the rest of the C-suite, are you working on frameworks with, or aligning frameworks, or learning about, because one of the biggest things, the reason why B2B CMOs have the shortest tenure in the C-suite is because the chasm between sales and marketing.
Mhm.
So is part of the understanding of, in arriving on frameworks that can help grow the business, understanding the frameworks of that C-suite, woman or gentleman in that C-suite, and making sure that we're all coming together and agreeing on these are the frameworks that are going to take us forward?
Yes, because yes, and it's not just sales. So like marketing and sales should be aligned at the bottom.
Yeah.
Hey, our goal, particularly in a B2B organization, is we have to sell. We have to sell our product. And then from a customer success standpoint, those new customers that sales and marketing are bringing in, they need to be sticky. We need to have, a long life with those customers. So we need to make sure that what we're saying in marketing holds true when sales is selling it, so that when they onboard and continue in their tenure with us, the customer success isn't having to explain that, oh, yeah, we don't really do that, or or customer success is offering a bad experience that, hey, we set up what it's going to be like to work with us. But then once they're a customer, we didn't walk away, because we all have experiences of organizations that have walked away. If as a company, we can do this much better than our competitors, it means the world to our customers
Oh,
and our prospects.
oh.
And marketing can help with that. And then in turn, it's also, just as important as kind of the sales relationship with marketing, or the sales and marketing relationship, the relationship between finance and marketing is insanely important. The closer that a CMO or head of marketing can be with the head of finance or the CFO, the better off you're going to be. And it's not just a budgeting thing. Like, I would argue that that budgeting starts for the next year right after planning for we should be having conversations about 26.
Yeah.
Right after right after the ink is dry on 25, because if, my CFO, I'm having weekly conversations with him, about, hey, here's what we're seeing, it's working, here's what's not, inviting the CFO into conversations with the head of sales. So now there's a triumvirate of, three of us kind of having a frequent dialogue. So there's transparency, there's visibility. If there needs to be a clawback in budgets, we're accounted for that. There's an understanding of, here's how the dollars are working and why. And it's, those fundamentals, like understanding the finance side of your business, the customer success part of your business, how sales operates, and why people are buying, and what those objections are, and why they like us, and being able to package that stuff up as well. Like, there's fundamentals in all of those things. And the more you can tap into them, you've justified your seat at that table. And it makes you more,
Especially, my goodness, if you can recognize and understand the frameworks that like your CFO is using, right?
Mhm.
Like your conversation, or the point you made about how we should be having conversations about 2026 as soon as we finalize 2025. Because you know what's happening? The CFO every day of 2025 is evaluating this 2025 plan.
Oh, yeah.
And so if you're not in there and having the conversations, right, and learning, then we're behind, right? Because that CFO is going to be formulating their opinions, all of their own or with us, right? And it should be a collaborative, right? We should be learning from what they're saying and saying, no, you're right. There are things that are going to be part of our 2025 plan that guess what? They didn't work, right?
Mhm.
And we need to own those up, and we need to be adapting, and we need to be changing along the way. So what I'm taking away from this conversation is not only the importance of frameworks, but working with other people's frameworks that are on your team, on the C-suite, on the board, right? And clearly understanding those. Because if we're working with our own set of frameworks and they're working with their other set of frameworks, that's like silos, right? Where like
Yeah.
marketing has our go-to-market plan and sales has their go-to-market plan. And we come into the same meeting, but we're not aligned and we're not support, and it's just obvious, right? We are, especially in marketing, we are a support department for customer success. We are a support department for sales. We are a support department for the CFO and finance, right? We're one of the biggest cost centers.
Yeah.
That's why CFOs look at us and the fingers point our way a lot, right?
Yeah.
So that's like one of my biggest takeaways here. But what I would love to know is, if there was one thing that you wanted other CMOs or CROs or CEOs that are watching this today, you wanted them to take away from this podcast, of everything that was talked about, what would that be?
I think, Steve, given what we've talked about today, I think there's, and this actually, I'm going to start with a quote. This one actually comes from a non-marketer. So the late great Charlie Munger, Warren Buffett's right-hand man, said, I'm gonna paraphrase his quote, but it was, you should go to bed smarter than you woke up.
Mhm.
And it's this idea of always continue to learn, always lean into the unknown and kind of continue to discover. And I think as marketers, if we're so singularly focused on our playbooks and on, the words and pictures that got us to where we might be, or we're a data-driven marketer and it's just the data, then we've got our blinders on to the value that we can bring to the rest of the organization. And I think understanding how your peers operate, and if you can boil those down into fundamentals and then turn those into either the frameworks that they're using, the frameworks that you're using, your marketing is going to get better, your longevity in maybe not just this organization, but throughout the rest of your career, you're going to have a fruitful career with lots of different options, and you're going to have a higher likelihood of success based on that. So go to bed smarter than you woke up.
Love that. I love that. As physicians in this country, they all have to go through continuing education. It's a requirement, right? Why isn't that the same in business? The learning is still more intense than ever, right?
Yeah. I think, yes, it would be, I think there should be some level of continuing education, but I think here's what it does. It gives the rest of us that put in that effort opportunity.
Yeah.
And if you're willing to learn how to write AI prompts, if you're willing to understand, how a website works or how e-commerce works, or, hey, you've, dabbled, Amazon's an interesting world. In my last organization, we did some stuff on Amazon, and just understanding what they've built there, just kind of unpack some of that stuff, you'll realize that in what Amazon built, a lot of the same fundamentals are in other places. And so understanding kind of what are the building blocks of each business and stuff, and being a student of business, of marketing, of, cultural anthropology, of people, of psychology, how, all of those things will make you a better marketer.
I just interviewed a woman. It was in customer success at Amazon, and their framework, their most important framework, is customer obsession. Completely obsessed to the point where they have that empty chair concept, right? Where there's an empty chair, either virtually or physically in every meeting, because the decisions we're making right now in this meeting, how would they be impacted if the customer were in the chair right now? So I think that's a perfect accentuation to the importance of frameworks and what you're talking about here.
Yeah.
And I know, Andy, people are going to have questions. So if would it be appropriate if we gave out the link to your LinkedIn profile, that if people did have questions, they could reach out to you?
Oh yeah. Yeah. Of course. Definitely. I love the other advice is network. Yeah. So happy to connect, happy to, answer questions, happy to network with people. So by all means, Steve.
Fantastic. Well, thank you for adding to that continuing education for all of us today.
Thank you. I got as much out of our conversation as I hope you and your listeners did. So thank you.